Police officers of Reddit. Who's the smartest criminal you've ever encountered? Most of them are really stupid. So this guy isn't a criminal mastermind, but here goes. He wanted to rob a jeweler's on our city's main street. So he found out the flat beside the jeweler's was empty and he hid there. For 2 weeks he triggered the alarm on purpose several times a night. Massive headache for the police and the business. We turned up to see nothing there, nothing on cameras, thought it was just a fluke, so the jewelers turned off the alarm system and said they would wait until morning to get a new one installed, because something wasn't right. As soon as he heard that and the police leaving, he tore down the wall, he'd already been working on this apparently, and robbed the place taking his sweet time. Escaped without anyone noticing for hours, until the jewelers came back in the morning. Then he tried to resell something he stole which had a serial number on it and got caught, so not that smart after all. Good effort though. I feel like we're gonna have a lot of good efforts here. But for real? Yeah, he weakened the defenses. He went in with a plan and executed it pretty well. After the fact, well, we don't need to talk about that. Story 2. A friend of my brother moved to Israel, where for a period of time it was/is acceptable to drive with an American driver's license. He was pulled over for speeding and when asked for his license, gave the officer his Costco card. The exchange apparently went something like this. Costco? What's Costco? It's the state I'm from. That sounds made up. There are lots of states you probably haven't heard of. Have you heard of Arkansas? How about Idaho? I guess not. Well, I'm from the small state of Costco. The officer apparently didn't have a response and wound up writing the ticket to someone with a Costco driver's license. Friend framed the ticket and still has it hanging on the wall. Story 3. Well, there was this one guy, we'll call him Jack. Now, Jack stole stuff, but also involved a lot of people. One time he was planning to steal a whole bunch of cars and all luxury cars. So what he did was he got his people to call 911, etc. from all different places, all to tell them that car theft was taking place in multiple different places at once. Oh, he also only used a few people each time, so it was different voices, people, locations, etc. So the police went each time until he actually did the crime, then no one came. He was never caught. When the owner of those cars came, the police didn't believe him. 10 out of 10 genius right there. Story 4. My primary school got robbed of all their new computers when I was a kid. They were so proud of their new computer lab and made a big celebration of it. This was in the dial-up days, just when IT was about to boom into the enormous industry it has become. The guys managed to jimmy a window enough to get a stick through it and wave it around in front of the motion sensors until they set the alarms off. Of course, being back to base alarms, the police would be notified straight away, and the thieves would close the window and hide away. So when the cops arrived, there would be no sign of forced entry and nothing was missing, so faulty alarm. They continued this cycle until the cops got sick of it and stopped responding. Then they were free to empty the place out and no one found out until the computer lab teacher unlocked the door the next morning. I never found out if they got busted in the end or not, but I like to think they didn't. We're only 4 stories in, but I'm sensing a theme. Just as a quick disclaimer here, do not take any of this as like advice. Now, I won't lie, these guys have some good ideas and it worked for them, but hey, I'm not trying to teach you how to commit crime. That's not what this YouTube channel is about, I promise. Story 5. The story goes like this. A homeowner walks out one morning to drive to work only to find his car missing. He reports the car stolen to police. A few days later, his car is sitting back in front of his house. When he gets inside, he finds a note. It was an apology that said the thief was in dire need of quick transportation, so he borrowed the first car he found with the keys inside. The writer noticed the sticker on the car for the local sports team, and just so there were no hard feelings, he left 4 tickets to an upcoming game in the glove box for the homeowner and his family. So the homeowner and his family attend the game. But when they return home, they find the house has been ransacked and all items of value are gone. Story 6. There's a small tourist town where I grew up that is divided in half by a big river. The only way between the two sides is over a long bridge, unless you go all the way around another mountain pass. These guys called in like 2 to 3 bomb threats to a posh hotel on one side of the bridge. I think they even left some dummy packages. All the police went across the bridge to do crowd control, etc, etc. The guys then called in a bomb threat on the bridge. Then they started robbing stuff on the other side. The police couldn't be positive the bomb threat was real or not and hesitated long enough to give the thieves a head start. I first heard this story about 10 years ago in Banff, Alberta. Never bothered to look up what was real versus what was invented. I think this is pretty close, but as my father used to say, you can't let the truth get in the way of a good story. Story 7. Here's one. I knew this guy back in the early 80s. We'll call him Jim. Well, he really wanted this high-powered superbike, but knew he could never afford it. So what he did was take a drive to London, and he scouted about for a few days until he found that particular model parked outside of a house. He goes back that night with a slide hammer, pulls the lock, and steals the bike. He gets it home, puts it in his garage, and completely strips it, so the only thing left is the frame and the bottom half of the engine, which he drags into the weeds at the bottom of his garden. Then he pours fuel over it and burns it a bit. A few weeks pass and weeds have started growing over it. It's at that point he calls the cops and reports someone has dumped a bike frame in his garden. The cops show up and he explains that he just got back from being away and found it. The cops take the frame and note his name and address. A few days later, the cops call him and say the bike had been stolen from London a month or so ago, from the serial number on the bottom half of the engine and frame, and that the insurance company had classed the bike as a write-off, and had told the cops to dispose of it. Now, because the frame was found in his garden, and the insurance company didn't want it, the cops were duty-bound to ask him if he wanted to keep it, or if they should throw it away. So he tells them that he'd always wanted to build a bike, so he gets the frame back from them, repaints it, then puts it all back together, and re-registers it as a Q-Reg, stolen and recovered. Edit. To all the people asking if I'm Jim, no, I'm not. I knew him well, though. We went to school together and he lived a few doors down from me. I had my own group of friends, and occasionally when out at the pub we would bump into him and he would tell us one of his exploits without a care in the world. As far as the bike goes, he proudly told a few people about it. But you know, we don't grass. He crashed the bike a few months later and was injured, but I can't remember how. He was pretty much a career criminal the last time I saw him, and he ended up in jail for a while. While many regard him as scum, I always felt bad for him. Both of his parents died before he was 12, and he was in and out of care homes for years. Out of his 4 brothers, one was murdered, the other died of an asthma attack, and another took his own life. He could never hold down a job and also suffered from depression. The bloke had a crap life. It's been more than 25 years since I saw him last, and I often wonder how he's doing. Story 8. Obligatory, not a cop, but close on 20 years now, a guy on Australia's Gold Coast got away with a bank robbery in broad daylight. He cased the bank for a while and discovered a pattern of the bank manager arriving about 30 minutes before anyone else each morning, where he would leave the front doors unlocked so staff could help themselves in without a key, or needing to wait for the boss to come in and let them in. One morning, the crook dressed himself up for a busy day of office work and waited for the bank manager to arrive. As the manager was unlocking the doors, he made his move, entering the building and threatening the manager with a gun. He got all the details he would need to access the vault and so forth, and then tied the manager up and stuffed him in his office. When the staff arrived, he told them that the manager had called in sick, and that regional office had sent him in to do the open shop thing, and no one batted an eye. This bank had a small walk-in vault that normally held only about 30 to 50,000 on any given day, but he timed his robbery for the morning after business banking day, when all the small local businesses would make their end-of-week deposits, and reportedly got a score of close to 250,000. Once the vault was open, he pulled out his gun and invited all the staff to enter the vault and locked them in. By this stage, the bank was due to be open, so when he went to leave, there were a number of customers waiting to get inside to do their banking. He told them all there was an issue with the computers and that the tech team had estimated it would take about 30 minutes before they would be resolved, so they couldn't open until then. He then got into his car, drove straight to the airport, flew to Hong Kong, and disappeared. To my knowledge, the cops never caught him and never managed to find the money. They knew he would have to leave most of it in Australia somewhere, though, because you can only take 10,000 Australian dollars in cash in any currency out of the country before customs pulls you into their interview rooms, so the assumption was that he would have to have an accomplice here who would funnel the money to him slowly over time. Story 9. Probably someone who committed a crime I never solved. With that being said, I had a guy use a sledgehammer to smash his way through a wall at Best Buy and steal a bunch of phones and cameras. He was smart enough to wear gloves and a face mask and not touch anything he didn't have to. Alarms didn't go off until he exited out the back door, which the alarm company gets after a minute or two and takes them like 3 or 4 minutes to call us in, giving him a good 5-minute head start, so he was probably a few miles away before we got dispatched. He clearly scoped out the area before doing his deed too. Smart dude. Story 10. A guy, let's call him Dave, I worked with, told this story. He was working at a Mercedes dealership. He was sitting at his desk when this well-dressed gentleman comes in and asks if he could test drive a specific car that was parked out front. It was also a busy day. Usually, they're allowed to let people test drive by themselves after they've taken some form of a deposit or something. Maybe the official ID, but not really relevant. So Dave gives out the keys, guy goes on his test drive and comes back a reasonable amount of time later. He walks in and hands off the keys, gets his deposit or whatever back, and this was about closing time. Even possibly on a Friday, everything is in order. Fast forward to the next business day. Dave's boss walks in and realizes that one of the Mercedes out front is gone. Dave has to explain that the car was returned and they have the key and everything. Turns out the criminal didn't test drive. He drove somewhere to create a replica of the key and gave that replica back to the desk. He kept the real key. That smart son of a gun. Story 11. This was in the late 90s, early 2000s. A guy in my dorm came to school solely to deal drugs. He took out student loans, registered for a bunch of 300-person freshman survey courses where he would never be missed, then literally never went to class. All he did was go to raves and concerts and keggers and sell party drugs. After the first semester, he was suspended. He wrote the usual, "I was young and dumb and in over my head" sob story. He got on probation for a semester, so he had a repeat of the fall. At the end of the year, he was kicked out and did not care. He made something on the order of $150,000 in return for about $8,000 in student loans to cover a year of housing and tuition. As far as I know, he was never caught. It may have been a short-sighted maneuver in the long run, but in the short run, it seemed fairly genius to effectively use federal loans to start your drug business. Story 12. Not a cop. There was an incident in Fargo, North Dakota, where a guy wanted to steal electronics equipment. The store had plenty of alarms on it, and generally cutting an alarm triggers an alarm, so he had to cut all of the alarms. This was before cell phones were really widespread, and alarms were usually just connected to the phone line. He found an access point to one of the phone company's big trunk lines. Correction, 9 access points. Massive, thick copper cables with tens of thousands of lines running through them. He cut through the whole thing with a circular saw, knocked out phone services to most of the town, and robbed an audio store during the ensuing chaos. There were no leads until a tip came in from another town where he'd pulled something similar. They hadn't been able to pin that to him, but had strong suspicions, and he had relocated to Fargo, so the cops pay him a visit. He refused to let them in because they didn't have a warrant, so the cops left to get one without leaving anyone to watch him, and he split. When they came back, they found the saw coated in copper dust and a lot of the stolen stuff. He was in the wind for a while, but even after he got caught, he had another card to play. While being transported between prisons, he used a key he'd made to unlock his shackles and climbed out the roof vent of the bus. That last one is straight out of some sort of daytime cop show. Are you kidding me? He actually did that? I didn't know people had the gall. I'm kind of impressed. Story 13. I have a friend who is no longer a criminal but committed crimes for about 15 years. Never got arrested or even investigated. Some of his highlights. Growing weed in a shed on his neighbor's property. The neighbor was old and never left the house. Buying a building under a fake name, taking out huge loans against it, getting HUD money, and burning it all down. Sold fake raffle tickets to raffle off stuff he never had and never raffled. I can't remember how many times he pulled that scam, but he bought a new car with the money. He moved a bunch of times because people would suspect him of being a con man. His dad was in jail for similar stuff, but he was never even questioned by the police about anything. Now, he has a family and a normal job. Story 14. Dude noticed that the bank vault had put its safety deposit box in a way that there was a space at the 90-degree point that wall meets wall. He times it on a Friday and climbed and hid in that spot. He had actually rented out a box which he put a clock in which alarms violently to see if there are sound sensors in the vault. Waited outside, nothing. Employees closed the vault with him inside. He has the whole weekend and gets to knock locks out with a hammer one at a time and steals everything. He then replaced the locks to look like they weren't tampered with and jumped back in a spot. Monday morning, the vault is open. Turns out the bank was doing renovations. He picked that day. Throws on a worker's jacket and literally walks out. Employees didn't notice till the first person came to open his safety deposit box. The lock fell in. They could not identify who did it, and he would have gotten away with it, save his big mouth. Turns out he was a hairdresser and kept telling people about how he stole from the bank and he was a genius and they will never catch him. Yeah, someone snitched, and he was picked up. They couldn't value what he stole as safety box contents are unknown. Because of this dude, all banks now fill the space where 2 safety cabinets meet with concrete. Made a movie Inside Man loosely based on him. His name was William Smarto. Okay, when OP wrote William Smarto, I'm like, so it's a fake post, right? It's a joke. Nope, looked it up. Real. This is a real thing. That's crazy. A real story on Reddit. And an interesting one too. Well done, OP. And I guess well done, William Smarto. Story 15. I heard about one person that pulled a shoplifting scam on a large, popular, and well-known US retail store. They walked in with some cheap nylon product to get one of those "I walked in with this" stickers that they used to put on returning merchandise. The sticker easily peeled off the product undamaged. They walked to the electronics department, grabbed an expensive box off the shelf, and went to customer service. They placed the sticker on the big box and asked if they could return the item without a receipt. Unfortunately, no, not without the original receipt. Ah, dang it. And they walk out. Customer service even gave the doorman the thumbs up, having just interacted with the customer. This took place before widespread inventory controls and cameras were absolutely everywhere. Story 16. Worked at a jail. After getting off work, I watched an ex-inmate, homeless, being released. He walked over to a patrol car, looked me in the eye, and then elbowed the window in. He was walked back to the entrance and rebooked in. It was the middle of January and he didn't want to get too cold. Edit. To the people saying can't break car windows, that's true. Also depends on the car. The patrol car used was specifically an old model, used more for the perimeter of the jail unless other patrol cars were in the shop. Those windows had been replaced so many times, so I don't know if it's the same material or what. Story 17. Not a copper, but this was pretty smart. I used to run bars at a number of venues around the north of England, one of which was Chester Racecourse. Usually we just have to keep an eye out for scousers trying to nick drinks or sneak in without paying. And with it being so close to Liverpool, there was a fair amount of security on site. You could tell them, as they would be suited, booted, a high-vis waistcoat on, and usually carrying a radio. Now, there were a dozen or so bars dotted around the course, and you can imagine the amount of money that was being taken from 100,000 or so punters drinking steadily from 11 until 8 or 9 in the evening. Every hour or so, the security would go around the bars in turn and take all the high-denomination notes from each till, stick them in the safe in the main building. So I'm stood there one day, pulling pints and doing the barman thing, and the security blokes have been around a few times and it's getting steadily busier. Then, one bloke shows up on his own, high-vis on and radio in his hand, does the till, leaving the usual receipt so we can balance at the end of the meeting. Bit early, I think, but hey-ho, I've got plenty to do. Then 10 or so minutes later, 2 more blokes show up, dressed the same. "Oh, your mate's just been here," I said. "No need to touch that yet." "What mate? We're the only 2 doing this duty today." Cue a rapid-fire and increasingly panicked exchange over the radio. Matey boy who'd done the till before used to work there apparently, so he knew the drill, and he'd been watching the guards and knew just when to time it and what order they were going around the bars in. Apparently he got round 9 or 10 before he decided to not push his luck any further, and walked away with about 80 grand. Just took off the high-vis, dumped that in the radio, and he's just one more guy in a suit in a crowd of thousands. They were a bit stricter on the procedure after that. 80,000 essentially from looting tills, and getting away with it clean too. Well, maybe not that clean because they knew that he worked there before, so maybe they found him. But still, as far as plans go, I'd give this like a 7.5 out of 10 at least. Story 18. I worked with this one guy who had a lengthy record. He had a system for getting released if he got caught. After committing a crime, if the police were in pursuit and he knew he was about to be cornered, he would act insane. His girl would play along with it, telling the police he was off his medication. The police would arrest him, but then send him to a mental ward with papers instructing the ward to release to police once he was cleared. Once he was in the mental ward, he would cause a distraction that would make the person attending the desk with the file cabinet to leave said cabinet. He would then crawl to the file cabinet, look for his release to police papers, and would literally eat them. When the psych evaluators decided he was stable enough to be released, there would be no instructions to send to police. He would be released into general public. He did this about 10 times until officers noticed him back on the streets. This stunt forced the state to change their procedure for detaining mentally unstable suspects. Story 20. Mandatory not an officer, but... The story of the Mumbai Opera House jewelry heist probably belongs here. Sometime in 1987, a guy placed an ad in the newspaper looking for recruits to the CBI, the investigative police agency in India. A bunch of people showed up. He'd rented an office to interview them. He selected 26 of the candidates, told them to assemble the next day near a popular jewelry store to practice a mock raid. He had a fake search warrant and all, handy. Then he led these guys to conduct a raid on the jewelry shop. Together they collected all the jewelry in the shop, took all the cash, and then asked the trainees to keep a watch on the store employees while he deposited the stuff. He then walked out and disappeared. Took half an hour for someone to suspect something was wrong and call the actual police. They never caught the guy, never even found out who he was. The balls on that man. Now, scam artists typically dupe 1 or 2 people at a time, maybe a small group if they're that kind. But this is incredible. He accidentally found his own elite strike force to rob a jewelry store with and made out with all of it. Honestly, once again, I'm just impressed. Story 21. A guy buys and finances a car, doesn't make a single payment, and after 90 days the repo men come looking but can't find it. Behold, over a year and a half later, an auto repair and customization shop files a mechanic's lien on the vehicle for over $15,000 of custom rims, tires, upholstery, engine work, and a completely awful paint job. So the auto finance company is not going to shell out $15,000 to get this now non-desirable car. So they sign the title over to the mechanic, who just happens to gift the car to the original owner. The original owner's credit is ruined, but what does he care? He has a brand new car, which he had been driving after about 6 months of hiding it. Pure frickin' genius. Story 22. A guy I went to high school with had been stealing from Walmart in a pretty clever way. He would grab video games, MP3 players, beer, etc., and throw them away in a trash can in the garden section. The workers never checked the trash contents and he would just wait, sometimes 5 hours until they emptied it in the back. He would hop in the dumpster and get his items. Once he took a cardboard box from a display inside, filled it with video games, a PS3 and extra controllers, grabbed some tape and pens and drew all over the box and taped it up to make it look used and tossed it in. An hour later, he had a whole new PS3 and a stack of games. Story 23. One guy would print barcodes, bring them into Home Depot, and stick them on merchandise in the $100 range. When scanned, the items came up around $10. Putting random barcodes on things isn't really illegal and super hard to notice. Guy 2 would come in an hour later and buy the underpriced stuff. Complete plausible deniability. They would then sell it on eBay. Only reason they got caught is because the guy with the barcode printer / software cut the second guy out of the operation. So Guy 2 stole a bunch of barcodes, put them on the merchandise, and paid for it immediately afterwards. He then proceeded to rat on the first guy and spilled the beans. They'd been doing this on a weekly basis for over 4 years. Because we could only pin the one case on him, the burglary was dropped down to a petty theft, and he walked away with a few days in county and a small fine. Dude probably took Home Depot for tens of thousands over the years. Story 24. Not a cop, and this is not as smart as some of the guys on here, but it's probably one of the smartest robbers in my small city. One of the main streets is cut into a hillside, and as a result, there is a very steep and quite tall concrete-covered bank immediately behind the buildings. Between two buildings, there's a gap that was filled at the street end by an ATM. To access it for filling, the security staff went through the next door building, out a side door and into the gap, which had the ATM at one end and the steep bank at the other. On the Friday before Christmas, when the ATM was to be filled to the brim, one of the robbers abseiled down the bank at night into the gap and waited for the guys to arrive to fill the ATM. They came early in the morning. As they came through the door into the gap, he held them up, took the money, and took off through the building to an accomplice waiting in a van on the main street. The van then took off on the main road out of the city and vanished. After a big search, the police finally found the burnt-out van. Turned out the gang had driven it up a gorge road and had two other accomplices in cars at the top and bottom of the gorge who simultaneously drove really slowly into the gorge and held up traffic, so no one was there to see them when they turned down off an access road and into some bush. They did end up being caught, because one of the gang was a former employee of the security company. Story 25. Think it was last year. Some bloke in France went to one of those huge supermarkets in which they have pretty much everything and took a PS4. Proceeded to rip off the label, went to the produce section and weighed the PlayStation after having selected apples. Sticks the printed price for apples to the PlayStation. Man paid €9 for a PlayStation and walked out of the store. Think they caught him after the fact, though. Story 26. Friend's older brother and friends used to rob cars. Never did it anywhere except for movie theaters. Guaranteed those people aren't coming back out for 2 hours. They would take their girlfriends, 2 guys, 2 girls, wait in their car, hanging out until they saw a car with too much money, usually booming bass and loud music, which guaranteed a few grand worth of stereo equipment. They would wait until the driver went in, give it another 30 minutes just to be safe, all walk over together, and use a center punch to knock out the driver's window and push it into the seat in one piece. Immediately, they would open the doors and cut the alarm wires if there was an alarm going off, and just start hanging out. Even if someone in the lot noticed the alarm and turned to look, they just saw 2 guys and 2 girls near a car with the doors open, looking like the driver was an idiot who forgot to shut off his alarm, which was confirmed when it went off in a few seconds. Then they would proceed to just clean out the car, usually amps, subs, speakers, etc., all in broad daylight. With 4 of them, it looked like some guys working on their stereo. They would close the doors and then leave. They did this for a year or 2 before eventually getting caught, because a father was waiting for his kids to come out and saw the entire process happening. They did some time. It was one of the smartest, stupidest things I'd ever heard about. To do anything like this in broad daylight is beyond me. Maybe I'm just too socially anxious to commit a crime like that in public. But I don't know, I can't even imagine it. That needs a level of confidence I simply don't have. Seems like they didn't really have a good lookout protocol though, because they should have noticed if someone was just watching them for the whole time, but oh well. They did it for a year or 2, so clearly it was working alright for them, until it wasn't. Story 27. Stopped a guy at night, willingly pulled over. Was Mr. Nice and had an answer for everything. Mistake was he left night vision on the dash, which gave me grounds to search. Had a perfect toolkit for high-end brakes, radios to reach others in on the act, thermal suits, etc. Barrister turned up to interview. Offensive going equipped, never stood a chance. He was released. On his way out, he joked that he hadn't been stopped in 10 years. He even complimented me on being proactive and observant. Record showed loads of burglary, then nothing since 2002. 2 months later, a camouflaged server site down the road was hit. 1.5 million in kit went. Police didn't even know it was there. ISP had no idea how the alarms didn't go off, and how such specialized kit was difficult to sell. Knew exactly who it was, but 0% proof. Nicest prisoner I ever had. Story 28. Not a cop and wouldn't call this the smartest thing ever, but it was pretty amusing and clever. A while back, there was a series of thefts along the bus lines in my country. People's things kept going missing from one city to the next, and nobody had any idea what happened as things were presumably safe in the bottom of the bus, which nobody except the driver had access to. So what happened? Apparently there were 2 guys, one of whom was really small. You get where this is going. The big guy would put the little guy in a suitcase, buy a ticket to somewhere, load him up with the rest of the luggage, and enjoy the ride, while the little guy went out, stole people's electronics, jewelry, cameras, and whatnot, then returned to his suitcase until the ride was over. Not really sure how they caught them, but it's pretty amusing to read about, and I found the whole thing clever enough. I guarantee you the guy in the suitcase was not loving it. He did all the heavy lifting of that operation. The big guy just had to be there to pick up the suitcase. For his sake, I hope the split was like 75-25 for the little guy. Just because they're criminals doesn't mean I don't believe in getting rewarded for what you do at work. Story 29. Possible urban myth, but I like it. Somewhere in England, there was this car park outside a local tourist attraction. Because it was city land, a booth was set up to collect parking fees. It cost something like $5/pounds/euros to park. The old man collecting the fees was a pleasant chap, never missed a day of work in 10 years, rain or shine. One day, the tourist attraction hears there's nobody manning the booth. Because it is a city-owned lot, they call the city to ask where the parking attendant is. The city says, "What attendant?" Old man was never heard or seen from again. He built the booth himself and manned it for 10 years. Story 30. I remember some thieves would go down and trigger the alarm of a vacant Blockbuster after they all started closing down. They did this for 2 weeks straight, so I guess the cops became convinced it was a false alarm going off at the exact time every night, so they stopped rushing to investigate. One day we find out that the pharmacy next to the Blockbuster was broken into through the wall they shared. Not only that, but there was only one tiny section the wall wasn't covered in shelves and panels in the pharmacy, so the thieves had to know exactly which part of the Blockbuster wall to break through. Still pretty impressed by the heist these junkies managed to pull off. Story 31. I used to work at Chase Bank. At the time, upper management demanded that we bankers work the lobby, meaning we would grab people from the teller line and help them do their transactions. But it was just an excuse to try to get new accounts, credit cards, etc. This particular day, it's midday, and it is super busy, and one of the female bankers got up to grab somebody from the line. She asks the man if he needs help, and he responds in Spanish. He says he's okay with waiting, but she insists that he come with her, so he follows. He sat down at her desk and handed her his note that said he had a bomb and he was robbing the place. She looked at him and said, "Oh, you have to get in line for this." The guy did exactly as she told him. She went and told the manager on the teller side what was going on. He called the man over and opened up a window specifically for him. She went to the bathroom to go hyperventilate. The manager proceeded to give the bank robber somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,000. The guy left and ran a few blocks down, where we assumed the getaway car was. Nobody knew what was going on. The phone started ringing and I picked it up. "This is Chase Corporate Security. We just received an alarm from your branch. Is everything okay?" "Okay, that's funny. You got me. Who is that?" Just then, I look up and start seeing a lot of commotion. A manager is locking doors. People are shuffling around quickly. Sorry, you know what? I think something did happen. I put them on hold and asked the manager, and he confirmed we were robbed. He then took the call. A week later, a similar situation happened at the bank down the street. This was just as they were opening. They had a different type of entrance. Double doors on the main street, a foyer, and double doors into the branch. The robber goes into the main street entrance, walks through the foyer, and realized the doors to enter the branch were locked. He knocks. Someone walks over and he slips them the note, again stating he has a bomb. The employee read the note and was able to lock the street entrance from inside, effectively locking this dude in the foyer. The employees all hustle out the back. The cops are called and he's arrested without incident. He isn't the same guy who robbed us, but the MO is the same. Spanish speaking with a perfectly crafted note in English. So the cops asked him where he got the note, and he said that some guys picked him up at a labor site and told him that he would make thousands of dollars just for dropping it off. Then, because he didn't speak English, he didn't know what the note said. I don't know if they ever hit another bank or if they were ever caught, but that has always stuck out to me as one of the smartest crimes. They're picking up somebody who is completely unassuming and who doesn't know them whatsoever. They're giving him vague instructions with a note he can't understand. And I'm sure once the transaction is complete, they're dropping him off at a labor site and moving on with their lives. We're even outsourcing crime now? Come on, man. Seriously though, this sucks to be the guys who they picked. You're just there to work honestly and make some money to survive, and these guys have you rob a bank and you don't even know it. That's just unfortunate. Story 32. Not police, but corrections. The smartest prisoner I've encountered was also the only legitimate psychopath I've known. Young, charming, attractive, and bordering genius levels when it came to law. Some people waste time while locked up. She didn't. Every night was spent studying law books religiously. For those unaware, U.S. inmates are granted access to a law library to work their cases. In the course of a couple years, she ditched her personal lawyer and started representing herself successfully, writing motions, appeals, and making a boatload doing the same thing for other inmates. If there was a technicality to be found, she found it. I imagine these are the kinds of folks that end up corporate lawyers. While incarcerated, she always had a steady stream of drugs, even while in isolation. Primarily coke. She'd instigate officers and inmates alike, create a situation, then bring a case. You had to document everything with this girl. When you're accused of misconduct and cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt otherwise, you become a liability. Several good officers were terminated during her stay. Requests to transfer her to other detention centers in the state were denied, as no one was willing to take her. She ended up successfully dodging prison and being sent to a drug treatment center. Prolonged coke use took its toll and she had a massive stroke in her mid-20s, leaving her partially paralyzed. That didn't stop her, though. During an altercation, she got out of her wheelchair, picked it up, and beat another prisoner nearly to death with it. That's been years ago, and I have no idea whatever happened to her as I left that line of work. It's always interesting wondering what would happen with this person in different circumstances. Clearly they have a genius mind in there, but circumstances have led them to this outcome. And it just leaves you wondering, if they managed to avoid drugs somehow and focus more on studies or something, would they just be one of the greatest legal minds out there? It's a little sad to think about too, though. Story 33. Heard a story from a coworker. Guy was a piece of crap and never got caught, but he was apparently constantly pulling this sort of BS. What sort of BS, you ask? Well, he used to go take cars for test drives. Only cars with full-size spare tires. He would go down a side road, get out, hide the tire off in the nearby woods. Then he would return the car, go grab the tire. An interesting way to get 4 matching tires. Just pick 4 different dealerships, and the dealerships would never know something happened until they sold the car. At that point, it could be an issue where the factory forgot to install it, and even if that was known not to be the case, how do you figure which of the many people that test drove it took the tire? Story 34. My friend's dad was a cop and he used to tell me all kinds of stories. There was a guy who was in the local drug organization run by the Irish who had a fake FBI badge, and he flashed it everywhere when he was around the cops. He would sometimes give wrong tips to the cops, leading them in the wrong directions. Then he would quickly leave the scene and act as if he had to do something important. The guy would be involved with smuggling and carjacking and murder and everything. But the second cops arrived on the scene, he would just tell them that a source tipped him off this was happening and flash his badge, making it seem as if he got there before them. Apparently this only worked a few months, but he said finding out that the FBI guy they worked with was actually a member of the mob was the most embarrassing moment in their department's history. Story 35. We had a guy come in our shoe store when it was super busy. He asked to see a pair of shoes like any other customer. They were decently expensive, probably over $100, and it was maybe 12 years ago. We were busy enough to be juggling between customers, and we were running back and forth all over the place and understaffed for that kind of rush on a weeknight. Guy sees we aren't paying attention, so he puts the shoes on and walks up and down a couple times as if he's testing them out. Once no attention is on him, he sneaks 2 random display shoes in the box, covers them with the tissue paper all nice, and walks right out of the store without us knowing. Right out of the mall. We think the shoes are in the box when we pick it up to put them back. Worker checks the box just before it goes back, but the guy is long gone. We check onto the benches and also find an abandoned pair of old busted shoes he came in wearing. Story 36. Not an LEO, but here's some memorable retail ones. Best Buy. Got robbed by people cutting through the ceiling and dropping down from there, lifting electronics out of the roof like Mission Impossible. No one was caught. Music retail chain. Would take deposits on upcoming releases, then would call you when it arrived and hold it under your name. The thing is that even when you would call and talk to the people, they may never come in for their item. So a store manager gets the brilliant idea to come in early to work and use the deposits to buy gift cards for themselves. POS, point of sale systems were so awful at the time that using a gift certificate deposits to buy a single gift certificate didn't flag the system. District manager is supposed to come in and audit our receipts, but he never did hers, assuming because she was a favorite. One day an assistant manager shows up 5 minutes early to work, sees that there's some sort of transactions on a receipt roll of a register, but the store isn't opened yet. Waits till manager leaves for the day and pulls the receipt roll. Catches it. Music retail chain, different location. Full-time employee and union member working at location for upwards of 15 years. Very antisocial and bad at customer service, so they use him for all truck operations, opening deliveries and setting things up to be stocked by other employees. This guy was awful to everyone, but he always volunteers to take out all the store's garbage, which is a crap job that anyone could do. I get suspicious and get the opportunity to follow him out by another entrance while he takes the garbage out one time. I see him head to the dumpster and then remove 3 giant industrial black garbage bags out of the trash. We're talking like 2.5 times the largest leaf bags for lawns. I wait till he gets to his car and then yell his name. Yo, Candy, bring me those bags. He starts stuttering. OP, it's not what you think. I open the first bag and it's completely full of the hottest and latest DVDs, CDs, and video games. This dude had been robbing the store blind for years. I suspend him on the spot and tell him loss prevention will contact him. Typically, the thief doesn't respond to loss prevention's attempt to contact, and after 3 days, you fire them for job abandonment. Same crappy DM who missed the thief manager's deposit scam from above gets a hard-on to get this guy. Lets the guy finally schedule a loss prevention interview 3 weeks later. Candy brings a lawyer. Says, I didn't do anything. Manager's word against mine. They bring him back and pay him back pay for the time suspended. Candy begins calling loss prevention on the daily to complain, I'm a thief. I make sure every customer on Earth that walks in, he has to personally help, which ends up finally driving him to quit. Best Buy again. Customer service counter worker where they do returns waits till any big box item reaches the maximum date of price adjustment. Then price adjusts the item, refunding the difference as cash and leaving it in the register. They had to memorize which transactions and correlate the sales flyers and the numbers and SKUs. Loss prevention couldn't figure out how the worker was getting the cash out of the register though, because there were no cameras that captured them ever getting it out. See if you can guess how. I have my own ideas. And last one, another music retail chain. A worker I refused to hire, who was related to another manager, was hired, while I ran a different store location for fourth quarter. Assistant manager's cousin. The cousin would write down credit card info from receipts and then buy items by having high school girls come in to buy the items, with him punching in the stolen info. He then meets them after shifts and sells the items for cash at a music retail chain that would buy and resell them. This fueled his drug habit. He was caught when an FBI agent noticed they'd been charged for PlayStation 2 at our location after coming in. He was blonde, blue-eyed, and she didn't want to press charges and ruin his life, so she let him just apologize and the parents paid her back. I can't tell you how many people he robbed this way. The corporation didn't want me to find out and open up a can of worms. They just let him quit and no one was reprimanded. That last one is like some serious identity theft level stuff, I think, right? I'm surprised they didn't get hit harder for that. Credit card fraud is not taken lightly, as far as I know. But to mention the first story real quick, cutting through the ceiling and lifting electronics out, Mission Impossible stuff, let them have it. Honestly, that's what I would say. I'm like, you know what? They worked hard for that. Story 37. Having worked as a disciplinary officer in corrections, I've always been amazed at the ingenuity of inmates. The problem most run into is the follow-up of the crime they commit. Our department received a call one night that there were 3 of our inmates walking down a street a short distance away from the jail. The 3 were caught quickly. They were still wearing their stripes. However, upon doing a roster check, it was discovered there was one still missing. He was caught about a month later, so the ingenuity was more in how they escaped. They were housed in one of our maximum security tiers. After lockdown, there's really only one way out of the cell. There is a very narrow window in each cell overlooking the yard. This was never really seen as a viable escape risk, as they were so narrow one would have to be really skinny to even attempt. Due to lack of staffing, our guard tower stayed unmanned, so they took note of that. They spent a year losing weight and observing the officers that worked the tier, taking note of which ones were lax in their duties. They loosened one of the windows, and when they finally reached a weight where they could all fit through, they took the chance. The officer on duty that night was so lax he didn't notice that 4 men entered a 2-man cell at lockdown. Not just that, he didn't do a roster check at lockdown, so they got out and used a mattress to climb over the razor wire. The problem is, they didn't have a good strategy for after they escaped. The one that was out the longest was probably the smartest, as he decided to part ways with the 3 who felt like it was a good idea to walk on the street in their prison stripes. But he had no real plan either. He spent his time living in people's fishing camps when they weren't around. He was caught when one of the campers surprised him, and called the department, who was able to locate him shortly thereafter. Story 38. Not a police officer, but worked in the county jail. We had just started up a partnership with ICE to help deport illegal immigrants that had been arrested. Yes, the controversial 287G program. Save your feelings on the program and just enjoy the tale. Guy gets arrested for public intoxication. He's Canadian, and his flight back to Canada leaves that night. His mom was on the flight or at the airport when he got arrested and wouldn't or couldn't bail him out. He happened to be booked in prior to midnight of the day we officially began enforcing the deportation stuff, so kind of perfect timing, right? His mom said she would either pay his bail or his trip home, but not both. Guy is bummed. No idea how he's going to get out or go back home. I'm working the block he's in, and he sees the immigration detainees and starts asking about them. A light bulb goes off in his mind. He calls his mom, gets her to post his bail, and was out later that day. I'm working in booking the next evening, and looky who's there. The Canuck is back, highly intoxicated and ranting about how he's overstayed his visa and is here illegally and demands to be deported ASAP. He left jail, went and got hammered, and just made a night of trying to get arrested. Ironically, he said it took more effort to try to get arrested the second time than when he got arrested the first time. I think what finally got him arrested the second time was a DUI or something. Or maybe he was banging uglies in public with the woman he was arrested with. So it took a bit longer, but he had a fun weekend and got a free trip back to Canada, courtesy of the USA. Story 39. Not a cop. A couple of years ago, this man went into a bank near me with a note while he was recording the bank teller. He didn't bring a gun or a mask, and the note was asking for money with "please" written somewhere. She complied and he walked out. She called the cops and then he was arrested. He tried to get out of it, saying he never robbed her. He just asked for money. And, "I don't know how I'm a robber, I just asked for it. She could have said no and I could have left." Well, he got 3 years in prison, so he was smart, but not smart enough. This one is pretty funny. The idea of passing over a note to a bank teller that says "money please" and getting it? Hilarious. I feel like the implication is still probably there that it's like, well, you're there to rob the place, so I can't imagine you getting off scot-free ever, but the idea, very funny and a little smart maybe. Clearly not that smart because 3 years says otherwise. Story 40. Couple guys came into my old work and stole a grand piano. We had a piano which was never played, so the boss decided to sell it off. Had arranged for company to come lift the piano, and with a lot of people coming in and out of our work, someone obviously caught wind the piano was moving. Come lifting day, a van came in and 2 guys in high-vis vests got out and mentioned they were here for the piano. They took a good 15 minutes to get the piano out of the building and into the van, and even members of staff assisted them. They jumped into the van and sped off. No one thought any different. Didn't sign anything to say the piano had been handed over. 40 minutes later, another van with the same name on it turns up. 2 guys get out and mention they're from the moving company and are here for the grand piano. A lot of confusion around work and laughs. Long story short, the guy who bought the piano never got his piano. Story 41. I'm going to relay one I heard from Finn J.D. John of the Offbeat Oregon History podcast. Around 1850 or so, there was a small boomtown built on top of a near cliff about a mile long and 100 feet or so high. The only way up or down was a narrow footpath that ran diagonally up it. A thief barges in on a poker game late one night, bandana over his face, and 2 6-shooters drawn, just like in the movies. "Stick 'em up." They stuck him up. "Put the money in this bag." They did. "Nobody move." He then runs out, jumps on his horse, and takes off towards the cliff. Of course, the instant they're clear, the gamblers run for their horses, shooting and hollering for everyone to come quick and join a posse to catch the thief. The thief and his horse just gallop down the cliff. The entire posse is right behind him, and all the horses put on the brakes, hard. They're not going over a cliff in the dark. The thief had spent weeks training his horse. First, leading it up and down the trail during the day, leading it up and down the trail at night, walking it up and down the trail by day, and walking it up and down the trail by night. All till it was ready to just gallop down the trail at night. Story 42. Not a cop, but a brilliant story. Worked at a grocery store. For sales tax reasons, every item is assigned a department code. Booth clerk, underpaid person who counts all tills at the end of the night, comes up with a brilliant idea. They created a new department code that didn't exist, and then changed several cheap items to that code. When they counted the money at the end of the night, they would pocket the cash from that department code. Since the department didn't exist, nothing in the books seemed off. Supposedly got over 100,000 before being approached. Quit on the spot and was never charged. It took years to figure out what had happened, and the company was never able to prove who did it. This was the early 90s when computers were still new to businesses, and most people didn't know how to use them or what they were capable of. Security was often very lax. Had another employee write small recycling slips for small amounts as well. He would again pocket the money. He got away with 16,000 if I remember. Eventually got greedy and was caught. Confessed to way more than they had on him. And that last sentence is why, if you're ever arrested for any reason, you shut the hell up. It's just true. Do not incriminate yourself in any way, whether it's true or not. Story 43. I was working construction at an Audi dealership, putting on a new facade. During the construction, they had decided to put new roll-up doors in. During the process, thieves walked right in and up a ramp where all the Audi 8s were parked. Seeing as it was in a dealership, they leave the keys on the tires where they're parked. They then turned them on and drove out in the middle of the night with 4 or 5 of the suckers. About $1 million in cars just drove out. I don't know if this is a smart criminal. This more sounds like a dumb victim, to be completely honest. Like, why? Don't leave the keys on the tires where they're parked. It doesn't make any sense to me. If they are able just to be driven out, the keys probably shouldn't be there, at the very least. Story 45. Not a cop, but there was a pool hall in town that was basically our Cheers. A group of us, probably 15 or so, frequented this place at least a few times a week. Got a phone call from the owner one morning asking me if I'd been there the night before and if I had seen anyone I didn't recognize. Someone had broken in and robbed the ATM for close to $20,000. The culprits had opened up a fire exit in the back corner of a hall, a door that could only be opened from the inside, which was one of the only places in a blind spot for the cameras. It used to be a bowling alley, so the layout in the back was strange, and they put duct tape over the striker so the door wouldn't latch shut. There was a birthday party going on that night, and as such, the place was full of unfamiliar faces. Shots were flowing like water, and with every round, one was bought for the bartender. When it was time to close up shop, the bartender set the alarm, which is on a delay, proceeded through the first set of doors, locked them, then out the front door and locked those up too. Unfortunately, because the fire exit door wasn't latched, the alarm didn't engage. Whoever set this up came back an hour later as per the security camera on the inside, used a screwdriver to pry open the unlatched fire exit, and had a good 3 hours to pry open the ATM. At one point they took a fire axe to the money box, and they left the same way they came in, without setting off the alarm. Poor bartender from the night before was the one to discover all of this when she opened the place at 10 a.m. the next day. They never caught the person and had to file an insurance claim. Surprisingly, didn't fire the bartender. The place was sold a few months later and is now a medical clinic. Rest in peace, Doolies. Story 46. Not a cop. Back in the 90s, I worked for a Bank of America branch in a very wealthy community. It always held at least $250,000 in the safe, and often upwards of $1 million. Many citizens with large businesses banked there, and many state agencies also brought in massive cash deposits from state parks and so forth. This branch was also somewhat isolated from surrounding areas, with only one road into and out of town, which theoretically made a bank robbery difficult, because the cops could easily block the exit route. Anyway, the manager told me the story of a previous robbery. Apparently some guy had found out the names and home addresses of the branch manager, teller manager, and merchant teller, head teller. He went to their homes and took photos of them. He also followed other family members to find where they worked and went to school. Presumably, this was over a long course of time. One day he showed up at a branch dressed in coveralls and with a large mechanic's toolbox on a cart, went over to the branch manager. Basically, he looked like he was there to fix something. He sat down, pulled out a folder with a brief letter on it, stating this was a robbery, and photos of the homes and family members and their schedules, where they were. He threatened to have his accomplices injure them if the robber didn't call the accomplice every 15 minutes, with an obvious connection to not setting off the alarm. The manager called over the teller manager and merchant tellers and explained what was going on. They all went into the safe and he loaded his cart with plastic-wrapped cash bricks. No marked bills, which were stupidly arranged back then. There was a small bundle of various bills and that was it, and obviously no exploding die packs. He then wheeled it out, loaded it into a truck, and drove away. Police found the truck a few days later, but it was stolen and now empty. Total haul was $1.2 million, and as far as I know, he was never caught. Story 47. Not a cop, but I got scammed big time. Now, this was damn near 20 years ago, so forgive the naive nature. I owned a big hot tub operation in the UK. A guy calls going nuts. He's a project manager on a big job for a high-end demanding customer. My jerk competitor has screwed up for the second time and not delivered his client's hot tub on time, citing shipping delays. His customer is gonna flip out. The deck is ready, his guys are on site, and he needs a 7-foot hot tub and is willing to pay if it can be delivered today. Oh, of course I can't deliver it today. I'm 2 weeks out for a delivery slot. He begs and pleads, but I can't make it happen. He asks how hard it is to move and lots of logistical questions about the ground prep and electrical requirements. Seems so legit. He says he does like 20 or so a year, and he's so mad with the other company that I'm gonna get all of his business. After again and again trying to tell him to screw off because I can't help him, he says, dang, my cousin lives near you. Can I get him to pick it up? Now, in 2019, I would laugh, but then it was the norm. And this jerk was smooth. I say, sure, as long as it's paid for. He's like, man, I'm 2 hours away. I can't get there to pay, but I can give you a credit card now. I'm wary and insist his driver gives us his license and photograph it. It all goes fine and he calls back a month later. He's doing a big job on a new build in a small cul-de-sac for 5 hot tubs. Gives me a couple cards to process and says he can handle delivery because the first one was so easy. I tell him same deal. In those days, he just took ID and it was good. Get a charge back a month later. Cards stolen. Plates not matched to vehicles. Licenses fake. Took a hit for £40,000 sterling, which at the time was damn near 60,000 USD. Almost ended me. Story 48. The guy got caught, but his plan was still pretty brilliant. He wanted to rob a bank next to a river that ran through a forest. The day before the heist, he put a help wanted ad on Craigslist for painters at a higher than normal pay rate. He said he needed a lot of people, so just show up at the bank parking lot at 10 a.m. wearing white painter's clothes with a hood, a respirator, and goggles. The night before, he'd tied a rubber raft under a bridge near the bank's parking lot. In the raft, he'd stashed a change of clothes and the keys to a getaway car that was parked down the river. On the day of the robbery, everything goes perfectly. He put on his painter disguise, got the money, and made his escape down the river after changing back into street clothes. clothes. When the police show up, they're faced with dozens of people dressed exactly like the robber, all of whom have no idea what's going on and none of whom have the money. Then a homeless guy walked out of the bushes. He thought it was weird seeing a guy in painters run under a bridge, change clothes, and float away in a rubber raft with 2 large bags. He was able to give the police a detailed enough description of the robber and his getaway method that he was captured soon after. So if you live in the Northwest and you're annoyed by the sizable homeless population, just know there's at least one person out there who dislikes them way more than you do. Story 50. Not a cop, but was screwing a dispatch lady. She responded to 911 calls, and she told me how to do the perfect crime from her observations of the police in her town. 1. Track the times the train came through town. The train appearances ran like clockwork. 2. Call in a fake shooting on the far south side of town 10 minutes before the train came in. 3. Rob the bank on the other side of town as the cops responded to the shooting. She noticed in each rare case there was a shooting, all the cops would race to the reported shooting location. Since the rail tracks cut the city in half, the cops would have to wait 20 minutes until the train passes, giving the robbers ample time to rob the bank. Thieves of Reddit, you can thank me later. This message is not endorsed by Undersparked. Just gotta say that for the law. Story 51. A famous thing that happened a few years ago where I'm at. The robbers cased out the bank for a good couple of months, it seems. And one guy had walked in with a heavy duffel bag and after some time asked where the bathrooms were. He went in. Then another guy wearing the same type of clothing plus bag had walked in and sat down where the previous man was. The bank was too busy to note that the guy who went in never came out, and the CCTV cam shows the bank guard actually talking to this new man, and later reported in news that the guard had thought it was the same guy. This was on a Friday, close to bank closing time. The bank was closed and the first guy had been hiding in the ceiling. He got down, went to the second floor, opened the window and cut through the grill with a small blowtorch. Let in a few guys, and they proceeded to cut through the safes with heavy-duty blowtorches, stealing all of the money. The safes weren't something like you see in the movies, but they were standard big self-contained safes with individual alarms which they've deactivated. Around the equivalent of 2 million USD simply vanished. They're suspected of catching an illegal boat transport to India and fled somewhere after. Story 52. Not a police officer, but I'm a paramedic who got called to a job in the police cells once when I was young and naive. Read, stupid. The patient was a bloke who had been stopped for suspected drunk driving. Then, when taken to the cells to be breathalyzed, he suddenly pretended he was having chest pains and collapsed. An ambulance was called, and even though he was clearly faking unconsciousness, we had to go through the motions of checking him over. When I went to check his blood sugar, I wiped his thumb with an alcohol wipe, and he suddenly and miraculously regained consciousness. He popped the alcohol wipe into his mouth and started chewing, all the while just grinning at me. It then meant the breathalyzer wouldn't be accurate, and therefore the police couldn't prove he had been driving under influence. I felt like an idiot, the officers were furious, and I learned a lesson that day. Well, from my understanding of things, breathalyzers aren't admissible evidence in court anyway, are they? No more than field sobriety tests, I thought. Or maybe they're, partly evidence, but not enough to build a whole case around. I don't know, I just know that breathalyzers can be wrong for a host of reasons. And as such, I don't think that in court they hold up that well. But hey, maybe I'm wrong about that. Story 53. In the 70s, there was a notorious gangster in Copenhagen who ruled the roost. It was harmless stuff, really. Cigarettes from the Eastern Bloc, booze, that kind of thing. He would mostly have it brought into the country via small boats. On one occasion, he had a big load of cigarettes set to arrive in the morning on a beach. Beaches are generally empty as we have incredibly crappy weather, but lo and behold, on the morning of the arrival, the skies were blue and everyone and their mother was on that beach. So he went to a production company and rented equipment for a small film shoot. Cameras, director's chair, megaphone, etc. He then went around the beach and casted good-looking young males to be extras in a movie about a cigarette smuggler. When the boat came in, he lined them up in a long line from the truck to the boat, called action, and had them unload the cigarettes into the truck. Cut! Thank you very much! And drove away. Story 54. My dad was a cop, so while not knowing all the tricks of the trade, I definitely understood the mindset. This occurred back in the 90s. TLDR, I incriminated myself in order to have a cop perjure himself on the stand, just in order to make myself look like a better person than the cop. So, the story. I went out partying with friends after work one night. Made it a pretty late night and closed the bars at 2 a.m. The problem was I was 60 miles from home, give or take. Being young, stupid, and fearless, I decided to go ahead and drive home. I wasn't completely smashed, but in retrospect, absolutely should not have been driving. The alcohol plus 12-hour workday was not a good combination, so I made it approximately 50 miles back towards home, taking 2-lane and country roads the entire time. The one small stretch of 2-lane highway I pull on, of course, has a state trooper sitting in the dark waiting for people to drive by. I swerved a bit and was honest to the trooper about it, because I was literally driving with my knee while trying to simultaneously light a cigarette with one hand, and was digging on the radio with the other. However, I didn't cross the center line as he stated in his report. Nonetheless, pulled over. I was polite, exited the car when asked, attempted his roadside field sobriety tests, and was promptly placed under arrest for DUI. Now, most people at this point would think they are screwed. However, remember, I said I understood the mindset of the cop. Most of them, no matter how trivial or earth-shattering the crime, will always try to be your buddy in hopes of a confession. Confessions make their lives way easier. They don't have to go to court. So we were friendly and actually chatted on the way back to the county jail. He mentioned I'd done pretty good on the roadside test considering how smashed I was. I laughed and assured him I was just tired and not drunk. He reminded me that I had blown a .159 on the handheld breathalyzer. The legal limit back then was .10. I was maybe 2 beers over. I told him that yes, that was probably accurate because I had, quote, only drank 4 or 5 beers. Common lie when getting a DUI. He laughed and said there was no way I would be a .159 if I blew at the station. I was way more intoxicated than that. I told him I wasn't, and that's where the plan formulated for me. I knew that once we got to the station, they will try and trick you into blowing into the breathalyzer there, because that can actually be used as evidence in court, whereas handheld breathalyzers cannot. Oh, well, there you go. Just popping in here to say, yeah, look at that. I was kind of right. Good to know. Anyway, on with the story. The usual way they try is to tell you that, well, if you blow, you'll just lose your license for 6 months and that's it. If you refuse, you're going to be suspended for a year. I didn't care. I knew that being suspended for a year wasn't a big deal compared to having an actual DUI conviction on your record for life. So we arrived at the station and the trooper tried his best to get me to blow so I wouldn't be without a license for a whole year. Yeah, I said no thanks. I'm not really drunk, etc. He finally accepted it and I signed my paperwork stating that I was refusing, etc. Once it was done and I had my copies, he couldn't let it go. He said, tell you what, I think you're going to blow at least a .19 because it's been a while, and that alcohol has been able to get into your bloodstream. How about you go ahead and blow? I'll tear the receipt up and throw it away here on the spot. I had him already. I already had my paperwork stating I refused. There was no way he could have admitted that in court because it would have been thrown out immediately because of coercion. I went ahead and blew. It was a .16. 0.001 higher than on the road. I smirked and said, told you so. He shook his head and said, okay, I'm a man of my word. He took the receipt from the machine, tore it up in front of me, and tossed it in the trash. I paid my bail, went on my way. Fast forward to our day in court. I had hired probably one of the shrewdest country lawyers that anyone had ever met. This guy was like frickin' Matlock. He has the trooper attempt the heel-to-toe sobriety test to show the jury how it could properly be done, and the trooper, having rubber soles with tread on his shoes, did not fare well on carpet and nearly fell, having to grab onto the juror's box to keep his balance when trying to turn around. My lawyer asked with a grin, how much have you had to drink this morning? Making everyone except the judge, state's attorney, and trooper laugh. Next, he put the trooper on the stand and grilled him about several things, which the trooper begrudgingly admitted to. After getting him sufficiently flustered, he went in for the finisher. He asked the troop bluntly, have you ever destroyed criminal evidence in a case? Of course, the trooper said, absolutely not. He was a man of integrity. So my lawyer asked him why he had destroyed the breathalyzer receipt proving my guilt. Trooper said, I don't know what you're referring to. Lawyer said, let's get the video footage from the jail and the jail deputy that was on duty that night here to testify. After recess, the footage had unfortunately been taped over, and the deputy was on vacation that week. Lawyer puts me on the stand. Flat out asks me what happened. I responded from start to finish. He asked me what I blew at the jail, and I said a .160. Judge then immediately tells the court reporter to strike that from the record, and instructs jury to disregard any commentary or questioning from the previous 10 minutes. I literally incriminated myself without actually pleading guilty, just to catch a trooper in the act of destroying evidence that would have convicted me, just to catch him in a lie. No matter what the judge told the jury, their minds were made up. I was a good kid, worked hard, loved mom and dad, and the trooper was a lying bastard just out to ruin my life, and he had perjured himself on the stand to save his own butt. They were out for less than 15 minutes and came back with a not guilty verdict. Jury nullification at its best. OP, you played the game well, but I can't respect the game you're playing. DUIs without consequences, don't love it. People really gotta stop doing that stuff, man. But yes, I'll acknowledge, credit where credit's due, the plan was quite good. And with that comes the end of our video. So if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. For now, I hope you have a wonderful day or night, wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.